Hi, everyone. Kumar Dattatreyan here with Agile Meridian. And we are here with Larry Moss, a leadership coach and business consultant. And I'm really excited to meet him. I was introduced to Larry by Brett Mers, who I interviewed a few weeks ago. We were talking about Agile and combat and planning and how they all play together. And Larry and Brett, I think they go ways back. And so I'm going to turn it over to Larry. Maybe you can say a few words about who you are, what you do, and we'll get started.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. And it's a pleasure to be here with you, Kumar. So, my name is Larry Moss. I own Azimuth Consulting. I'm a leadership coach, a leadership trainer, and developer. So I started the company back in 2019 in preparation from retiring from my career. I spent 32 years in the federal government within the intelligence side, and part of that was time spent developing leaders, developing programs for organizations so that we made their leaders stronger. I was an executive coach along that way. And so when I got ready to retire, I'm like, you know what? I love doing this and I want to start my business and do it full time.
That's great. So what drew you to this leadership side, leadership development side?
So I've always been a student of leadership. And I know when I first joined the military, many years ago, I go home and I tell my parents, okay, I just finished college, but I'm not pursuing what I went to school for. I'm joining the military. And I remember my mom looking at me going, it'll never work. I said, why not? She's like, because you ask too many questions. You ask why all the time. And they're not going to like that. And it's a very structured environment. But, over time, I feel that it helped me be a better leader because I didn't accept the status quo. I looked as there was better ways to doing this. And even in that structured environment, there were opportunities to grow and to become a better leader. And, I had the opportunity many times within uniform and then outside as a senior civilian to work with some amazing leaders, had good examples, also had bad examples. So I've always been drawn to that leadership concept. What is leadership? In its core, it's influence. How do we influence others? And it takes many forms. So that's what got me drawn towards the leadership development. And I've always just looked at extra tools that could make me better at that.
Are you a John Maxwell coach?
What gave it away? The definition of leadership. But yes, I am. I was actually already a certified coach for a while before I went in and took Maxwell's program. I've been a follower of John Maxwell for decades, and I think one of the first books I ever read was Failing Forward, and that whole concept is that failure's okay was not something that I was used to. So that his writings have always impressed me, and when I had the opportunity to kind of take a look at his program, I jumped on it.
That's awesome. So I'm also a John Maxwell coach. I have been since 2017 or so. And so, I do like a lot of the books. I've read many of them, and he has a common theme throughout all of his books, and it's about leadership being influence, as you put it earlier, and I couldn't agree more with that. So when you meet with your clients, what would you say are the most common leadership challenges you encounter?
Actually, understanding. It's understanding themselves and understand those they lead, because we all seem to have this. Whether it's we've gotten it from a book or whatever, we got this formula that we think leadership is all about. And we don't realize there's many aspects to it, but it all comes back to who we are. That's one of the reasons we always start with assessments when dealing with our clients to find out who we are and how we are. Because if we don't understand that, we can't grow into what we want to be.
Right. Yeah, that's a really good point. So awareness is so critical. No matter whether you're a leader or a follower, I think everyone, I don't know if you agree with this, but I think everyone's a leader in something that they do.
Yeah.
Whether they even in their job, they're still leading themselves on how to do their work the best way they can, to a certain extent. Does that resonate with you, Larry?
No, absolutely. And I think one of the hardest people to lead is ourselves. I can attest to that over years of failing and getting up and trying again. There was a point in my career, in my life, that I always I was always striving to be the smartest guy in the room. Okay.
Hmm.
And a lot of times I was. So that was because I was in the wrong room. I was placing myself someplace that everybody was looking at me. And I realized, you know what? That's not leadership. Okay. That's conceit, and it's self, it's self-assuring me. That's it. But it wasn't helping anybody. And so once I figured out that I needed to be a listener, number one, to listen to what's going on. And then I don't need to be the hero of the story, right? Other people are the hero. I need to be that guide,
Hmm.
guiding them towards what they need, what they want. And so, now I have the mentality that if I'm the smartest person in the room, then I'm leaving, because I'm not going to help anybody there.
Yeah, that's really good. So you wrote a book recently, Authentic Leadership. I'm
I
going to
did.
hold it up for viewers that are maybe interested in buying a copy of it. Tell me about the genesis of this book.
So again, it goes back to, if you ask somebody, what does leadership mean? Where did you learn to be a leader? I had a client ask me the other day, can you give me a good book to read on leadership? I was like, I can give you a lot of good books to read. There's no deficit on leadership ideas, and but one of the things that always resonated with me was authenticity. You can tell if you've got a fake leader, someone who's just that fake it till you make it type of person. You can really get to the heart of the matter of, are they true? Do they build trust? Do they build collaboration, camaraderie in the group? And so like I said before, I've had the opportunity to serve, and I say opportunity because it was to serve under some toxic leaders, because you realize what doesn't work. But I want to make sure that leaders are on off, because even if you're a bad leader, if I know you understand that you're a bad leader and you're at least real about it, I can deal with that. Okay,
Yeah.
I can move on or whatever. But that's kind of the genesis of this, and it begins. Leaders know themselves. A good leader always looks first at themselves to see, where am I at? Where do I need to work on?
Yeah, that's great. So what does this look like in practice if you're being authentic, or say taking the other track, if you're being inauthentic? What does that look like?
Yeah, so I think this is one of the hardest things for leaders to do, because it's not what we're taught. And Brene Brown talks about this in many of her books, the idea of vulnerability.
Yeah.
So and I'll caveat that with most men who are leaders, we look at vulnerability as a weakness.
Hmm.
Whereas if we look at it as a strength, because of what being vulnerable does, right? It brings self-awareness. It brings the ability to understand, where do I need to grow in order to be a better leader, to be a better business owner, to be a better husband, father, whatever the case may be. It starts with vulnerability. So getting past and you asked this before, what are some of the things that my clients struggle with? It's that self-awareness. It's the
Mm.
willingness to be vulnerable and go,
Hmm.
okay, I want to take a look at who I am. And I think that's how it looks in practice. The first step is to be vulnerable and to
Yeah.
understand it's okay to be vulnerable.
Yeah, that's great. Sometimes it's hard though to be vulnerable, right? Especially in an environment that is psychologically unsafe. Leaders are humans just like anyone else, whether you're leading a team or leading a division, a department. If you don't have safety, how can you be vulnerable? How can you be open? How can you lower the guard, as Brene Brown says? Lower the
Mhm.
armor, not the guard, the armor. Remove the armor and just be yourself.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And even for leaders, why do I have that armor? Okay, if I have that armor up, it's usually because of some type of fear that maybe because of a past incident. It could be those self-limiting beliefs that where I don't think I'm good enough, or
Mm.
it could be a fear of, hey, I'm scared somebody's going to be better than me and take my job. And if I show them that I'm vulnerable, what kind of a leader am I? And
Yeah.
it's the culture. You're right. It's the culture we've been brought up with. Everybody talks about, being a superhero, being the best looking you can, driving the nicest car, whatever. None of that matters, all right, when it comes to leadership. And again, I think it's John Maxwell that says, nobody cares what you know until they know how much you care.
Yeah.
And all of that starts with vulnerability.
Yeah. John Maxwell has a leadership assessment, right? The levels, 5 levels of leadership. And, level 1, you know this well, but for our viewers, level 1 is you're promoted to a position of leadership. And so you lead with that authority. Basically, you're a level 1 leader, you lead with authority. And level 2 is you lead, but people follow you because they want to. And level 3 is, this builds upon each other, right? Level 3 leaders are people follow you because they want to, and they get results. So how do you recommend leaders balance caring for their team, ensuring that you build a team that wants to follow you and still deliver results?
So it all comes down to trust. I mean, because nobody's going to want to follow you unless they trust you. And, Stephen Covey talks about that in his book, Leading at the Speed of Trust. Where we can come in and be authoritative, lead from my position, but that authority only goes so far. But yet when I build the trust, and this goes back to that building a safe environment too, if the ones that I lead trust that no matter what they say, do, or feel is going to be recognized and they have permission to feel, then they're not going to hold back their opinions, right? So if I'm a leader and you failed to meet expectations, okay, there shouldn't be any fear of you coming to me and saying, Larry, I didn't meet the goal. I didn't do what was expected of me. Because if you trust me, you know that, all right, we're going to correct the behavior, but then we're going to move on. I'm not going to yell at you. I'm not going to demean you. But so many leaders have that, when you're leading from position of authority, you're limited on what you can do because your position only carries so much weight.
Yeah.
Always somebody above you, right? And so it comes down to trust.
I like that. Yeah, build trust, leading at the speed of trust. That's a good one. Was that Stephen Covey you said?
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. So we've mentioned a lot of books. I'll put them in the show notes of the video and the podcast. So, this is a common thing, right, in our society. People think of leaders as being, they have presence and they demonstrate gravitas and, they command a room and a leader walks in, everyone looks up and like, whoa, I want to be like him or her. And what if you're introverted? That's not your style. What do you tell leaders who are introverted that have been told, hey, you need to be more present, you need to demonstrate more presence, more gravitas, so on and so forth?
I love talking to introverts. My wife is an introvert and she's an amazing leader, but it's tough. And I always tell introverts, I'm like, look at this as your superpower. Why? Because if you're a high D or high I on the DISC scale, which, I'm a high I, so I'm all about relationships. Okay. I build presence. I will command a room, sometimes to my deficit, but just because I have that gravitas, okay, doesn't mean I've got the right answer. So when I work with leaders who are introverts, I'm like, don't let your bosses or your people take that for granted, because what an introvert does is they analyze very deeply before they commit. And that is so needed in business today, because it's easy for me to come in on a Friday and go, hey, there's the plan. This is how we're going to execute this new process and organization. Starting Monday, everybody's going to do this. And the introverts are usually in the back of the room going, I don't think this is going to work, but I'm scared to say anything. So leaders should take advantage of that skill and that ability to analyze, because that's not a gift you may have. If you're a high D, you don't analyze much. You just, drive forward, just do, right? And, but you're missing a key element of the whole successful process, and that is utilizing those who are termed introverts.
So would you say that the approach to coach leaders who are introverts is to do what? Is to value that they are how they are, and is that what I'm hearing?
Absolutely. It is valuable. And a lot of times when we do a DISC assessment, right, you're a high whatever on the scale, I tell people, I said, it doesn't mean that you're weak in the other areas. It's just that you're stronger in this area. We have some element of all 4 areas in our life. It's just, this is where we shine. This is where we're
Yeah.
most comfortable, and be comfortable in being yourself. There's a lot of times we're we take leadership positions and we find ourselves uncomfortable because, and that's okay. We grow there in that discomfort. But if it's trying to utilize a personality trait, a skill set that we don't have, then how do you move what you do have and operate out of your strength levels?
Yeah. Do you feel that introverts can develop? Is there a way for them to develop presence and gravitas and things like that, things that are valued in modern corporate society?
I think to a scale that they can, but you got to remember as well, this is who they are. And so how long can you do that, right? If I don't enjoy what I'm doing, and if I feel very uncomfortable, I can only do that job so many hours, so long,
Yeah.
and then it just builds up more and more stress. So that's a unique balance that
Right.
I would work with the client and find out, number one, what environment do they work in. If it's high pressure sales and stuff, that it might not be something that they're going to ultimately succeed in because of the outcome of the other stress levels that it could bring on their life.
Yeah, good point. That's a good point. So really knowing who you are, so it all boils down to self-awareness that can help you determine how effective you are as a leader, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we didn't really talk, we touched on John Maxwell. Are there other frameworks that you use, maybe your own from your book?
So one of the things that we do at Azimuth Consulting is we look at three things. We try to keep the steps as simple as possible. If I give you the 12-step process to building a culture in your organization, I'm going to lose you past three anyway. So
Yeah.
we do primarily three things, and under the hood of that is some of the tools that we use. But number one is awareness. That's step one. We have to bring awareness of all the skills, the strengths, the weaknesses of the individuals, the organization, down to the team level. What does that look like? Looking for any gaps that you may currently have. Maybe you have a gap in one team to where everybody is all high D's, right? Well, if you got all high D's in the room, you got a lot of motivation, but no application. Nobody's moving forward because everybody's trying to rally for a position. So we look at that, and then we look at now how do we align all of this to your values, your beliefs, the behaviors that you, as an organization, as a culture that you want to have. And once everybody's aligned and you're sure you've got the right people in the right seat, the right people on the bus, as Jim Collins says, now we can move towards building accountability. And that's accountability for the outcomes, the results. I know we had talked earlier about OKRs. OKRs are a powerful tool, but if you don't build the framework behind them, then they're just, a bunch of goals and tasks that you want to do that don't align to anything. So we have to build the alignment. Now we can build the accountability to the outcomes.
Right. In today's world where things are changing by the minute, right? 3 years ago was the pandemic, of course, that affected everyone. Pretty much the whole world was affected by the pandemic, some more than others, right? And of course, the changes don't stop there with the pandemic. You've got AI that's disrupting how businesses operate. It's creating opportunities for new types of businesses. How does a leader cope with all of these changes?
So I think the leader copes with these changes with the understanding that they need to be able to pivot. They need to plan. You can't plan for everything, but the concept and the action of planning is, once that's understood and they become proficient in that, then as crisis happens, as environmental changes happen, they can then pivot in the right direction. And the key to that is also being present. So many leaders, and you brought up the pandemic. I witnessed so many leaders just disappear. Okay, small companies, large companies. Even I was still working for the government at the time, and I saw senior leaders just disappear because they didn't know how to answer the questions that was being asked. And at the time, I was working for DIA, and the director was General Bob Ashley. And I use this example so many times, and when I speak, But I remember, this is a 3-star general who, in the middle of the pandemic, we sent everybody home, right? You're talking an intelligence organization who, I worked in office without windows for years. So what am I going to do at home, right?
Right.
But he sponsored a town hall every week, every Friday morning. You would come on virtually on Zoom, where they started with Zoom and then moved to something else. But it was him sitting in his house in uniform, his wife sitting to his right. And he had his staff in the background on different connections, and he would answer your questions. And if he didn't know, he goes, I don't know. And he ended it with, I don't know what's next because this is all new territory.
Yeah.
We're going to do this together, and we'll come out on the other end and we'll be fine. And he would end the session. He'd pick up a guitar and he'd play his favorite Beatles song. All right. Nothing you would normally see out of a 3-star general who's led in combat, but I saw him being present. He was being vulnerable by saying, I don't have the answers to this. I don't think anybody does, and I'm not going to tell you I do. But what I can guarantee you that we're going to do this together. And that made a difference, all the difference in the world in leading that organization. And we saw examples in other companies. Chick-fil-A actually made more money during the pandemic than they did prior.
Yeah.
They pivoted and they changed the way they did business because of it.
What do you think the key characteristic is for companies that were able to pivot and take advantage of new opportunities that change brings versus companies that don't, right? That go out of business?
Yeah. I guess I'd have to dive deeper into each situation, but there's always an element of trust. I'm trusting the people that work for me and how they handle crisis, because innovation happens in a crisis. It happens when we've got an issue that is disrupting our operation. Well, when you can sit down and analyze that and go, okay, where are the disruptors coming from? Is there anything we can do to change that? If no, then how do we move? Because you only got a few ways to do things. You can either change your environment or move to a different environment. And so, we couldn't do anything about COVID or its impact on our businesses. So the only option I had is do business differently. And I think that's, things like Chick-fil-A, how they did it. Well, all of a sudden their parking lot became multiple drive-throughs. And it gave opportunities for people to get out of the house and still get something to eat in a friendly environment. And then they catered, and it wasn't the normal way of doing business. So
right. Yeah, that's a good example of, I would say, if I were to summarize what you said, it's adaptability is that characteristic from the examples you gave. It's being able to adapt to the situation at hand and make decisions based on what you see on the ground. That to me is, and again, based on what you said, to me is the mark of a good leader that can lead in times of change and chaos, right? In times of VUCA, right?
Absolutely.
They're able to inspire their team to think of new ways to operate in a strange or a different business landscape that they're used to.
Yeah, I think rather than adaptability, a lot of times leaders we tend to assimilate to our environment, and which may feel comfortable at the time and safe at the time, but that adaptability causes us to step out of our comfort zone and move in a different direction.
That's right. Yeah. I also think maybe things like the ability to unlearn, right? To things that that may have served you well 5 years ago, maybe they don't apply anymore. And so not relying on past knowledge, past successes, past whatever, and being able to unlearn things and learn new ways of doing things. I think that's a component as well.
Yeah, and that's hard to do. I know whenever I go into any opportunity, I always look at what can I learn, what can I relearn, or what can I unlearn? And that unlearning is the hardest thing, because we built habits around it. We built behaviors around it. And so, just the fact that, is it because I need to wait and do this a little longer and maybe it'll get better? No, it's time to let go.
Yeah. Yeah,
People
it
that
is.
have
It is.
problem unlearning things need to look in their garage. I bet it's full of crap that you need to get rid of.
Yeah, I mean, if we could all be sort of unemotional and logical and detached, then that would work. But humans are emotional beings, and we attach value to things that may not really have any value anymore. And so, unlearning that and creating new habits is a challenge. And that's, I suppose, where you come in, Larry, as a coach, to help people gain awareness of things that maybe they're attached to, maybe a physical thing, maybe it's a habit, and unlearn that in some way.
No, absolutely. I'm doing a webinar here this week with a friend of mine, and it's on leadership accountability. And I love his definition of accountability. It's the unemotional review of what expected versus what actually happened.
Yeah.
And so often when we're dealing with accountability, we don't remove that emotion. It's, as a leader, we're upset, we're maybe anxious. You gotta get that out. Because when we review anything, we have to try to remove the emotion from it in order to get a true review of it.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. So we've got a new generation. The new generations are always growing into leadership roles. How do you coach Gen Zs?
I think there's a Gen Z and then Gen Y. Like my youngest two boys are both Gen Zs on each end of the spectrum. One's 20, one's 25, and the other is 20. And we talk about this all the time. And matter of fact, I have a couple of clients that said, "I'm just not going to hire Gen Zs." You don't really have that option because I'm not coming to work for you. So you got to hire them somewhere. So our only option is to develop them. And I think the first step, just like somebody did with us, I mean, I'm a Gen Xer, and I'm sure previous generations are going, what is the world going to be when we leave it to these Gen Xers? And you know what? We made it, right? We made it our own because this is their world that they're going to run one day. So what are the concepts? What are the leadership skills they need to understand? And I think in developing, Gen Zs, it's the same methodology is understand yourself, build trust, and you start there. But we've got to understand each other, right? And that's again where I love any type of scientific assessments. It gives me a better understanding of myself and others. It has value right off the bat. And a lot of times it's hard for leaders when we're two generations away to sit and talk to another generation. What do you need? What does success look like for you? What does work look like for you?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, we see people the way we are versus the way they are. And so it comes down to those questions, active listening, and a plethora of other leadership skills that come into play.
Yeah, and I would add that the only thing I would add that as a coach, we have to be very mindful of our own biases and what we associate with, terms like hard work or just work in general and so on, because these concepts are things that we grew up with and are different than what the younger generation has grown up with. And it's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, as a Gen Xer, our concept was get a job, work hard, save money, and invest so that you can one day do what you love.
Right.
Live your purpose. Well, now that's flipped 180 degrees. Gen Zers are like, well, I want to do what my purpose. I know I want to help people. I want to do that. And eventually I'll make money doing that. And that's a great approach. But
it is.
How do we look at that? How do we make our businesses adjust to that mindset? When I first started, you get in a company and you work for, like I did with the federal government for 30 years and you get a retirement and boom, you're happy.
Yep.
But it's okay to move every 2 years.
Yeah.
3 years, whatever. And so as a business owner, if I understand that, now I can better develop how I need them while I have them. And I think that's a key of working with Gen Zs.
That's excellent. Well, we'd like to keep these to around 30 minutes, and we're around 30 minutes right now. Anything I didn't ask you that you would like to share?
Who's my favorite football team? No.
Who is your favorite football team?
Cowboys, baby.
Cowboys. My
Yes,
goodness. How could you? You live in the DC metro area. How could you root for the Cowboys?
I know. I'm a Cowboys fan. We're doing great. finally. It's been since the 90s. But I did watch
Yeah.
the Commanders yesterday. They did.
Until they meet the Commanders, and then you won't be so happy.
You know what? The Commander, I am happy because I do live in the DC area, and I'm happy to see the Commanders getting better. And
yeah, me too. Me too. It's been a long time coming.
we feel your pain.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, Larry, so much for appearing on the show. And I'm sure we will collaborate in the future on topics around leadership, coaching, business coaching, business building. And for those of you watching, I will include your information in the show notes. So please do contact